welcome to the Dahl Global Virtual Lounge. This is a show where we discuss the future of the modern workplace and the impact of diversity, inclusion and belonging with the world's most successful and innovative leaders. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by three fantastic global leaders. We're joined by Shane Farrell, who is the CEO of Ipsos Mori, EMEA, and chairman of Ipsos Global Tracking across Ipsos. Also joined by Anthony Skrivikis, who is the CEO of Tribe. Anthony, hi, and I hope I pronounced your last name okay there.
Not even close.
You can tell me in just a moment. And finally, last but not least, Fabian Wong, who is the CCO and Head of Experience Design and Consulting at Capita Salesforce at Capita. Anthony, I'm so sorry. How do I pronounce your last name for everyone who's tuning in?
That's all right. It's a common challenge. It's Sverskis.
Sverskis, thank you ever so much for that. And I probably should have clarified that pre-today, but thank you very much for that. And today on the show, we're discussing a plethora of subjects around the theme of leading in uncertain times, which of course we're all experiencing, often very similar, but also very, very different experiences across the board. And so we're going to be unearthing some of the experiences that you've all had individually within your businesses, and also examining what the future looks like post-COVID and some of the digital trends perhaps that are impacting our businesses and our societies. But before that, I'd love you all to just give a brief introduction of yourselves and some of your experiences. And if it's okay, Shane, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
Sure. So just a small correction. My name is Shane Farrell. I oversee Europe, not EMEA, within a global research company called Ipsos. So Ipsos is a full-service market research company across 87, 88 countries. And I think what's interesting today, given what's going on with COVID, is that we're across a global pandemic, and it's probably the first crisis that has ever really occurred that's global. I know in my experience, I've dealt with a number of crises in different developing markets, whether it be in Russia or other parts of Eastern Europe, where we have issues in Argentina or whatever, but this is the first global crisis. And to be a global company trying to deal with that, it's interesting to see the overview and to see it change from one part of the world. We saw it take off in China and move to Italy, Western Europe, States, but everybody's impacted. So it's if we talk about inclusion, it's a very inclusive crisis and pandemic that we're dealing with.
Thanks, Shane. And Anthony?
Yeah, my name is Anthony Sverskis. I'm the CEO of Tribe. We're a global tech platform that connects brands with social media influencers and content creators. We've got about 60, 70 people around the world in 5 different offices. It's obviously a very new experience for us, but we work a lot in the social and digital space. So we're also seeing a lot of resilience from our clients and a lot of new interesting trends in the way that people are marketing through this time. But one of the most interesting things, as Shane said, not only are we getting a unification of different countries around the world, I think from a workplace point of view, one of the interesting challenges is we're all going through revenue and growth or survival challenges as businesses, but there's this additional challenge of how do you keep your teams together, and how do you keep people motivated, and how do you keep people productive? And it almost becomes a competitive advantage in itself is if you can navigate through the business side of things, but also through the organizational side of things as effectively as possible.
Hi everyone, it's Fabian, currently the Chief Creative Officer here at Capita PLC. We are a technology services BPO company, and our main hubs of operations, very excitingly, it's in the UK and parts of Europe. Previously, I was the managing partner in Asia, leading the Deloitte Digital Tokyo 2020 digital efforts. So I just came back. Unfortunately, the games have been sort of delayed into next year. And in terms of my field of expertise is in the field of experience design. So when I look at COVID-19, I was tracking it very closely since it happened in Asia. I was actually in Singapore, where I was born, for the Chinese New Year, and that pandemic started to to change things. I notice a lot of things changing from three perspectives. One would be from a consumer behavior angle. The number two thing is about ways of working. Things have changed rapidly. And the third thing that I see is about security, data, and cyber. So in terms of how individuals are a little bit more concerned about their personal security, wanting to know and learn, as what you said, Anthony, about new ways of working within teams, ways of engaging with new technology. And obviously consumer behavior right now, if you look at Lego, if you look at McDonald's, even if you want to go out and buy a Ferrari, all things around experience have changed. So my focus right now, and I think the fear and the opportunity for us is basically, two sides of the coin. If we look at this positively, is that I would say that companies that look at the redesign of proper experiences for the future, today and for the future, will be the winners. Folks that stay put and not adapt and adopt to those new experiences that are needed. I'll talk about that a little bit more, because I do have my sort of like, definitions of different kinds of experiences that companies will need to focus on. The right kind of experience will take companies further. The wrong kind of experiences, just imagine if you're going to operate BMW as you were today, good luck, right? You'll probably not grow. So we'll talk about that a little bit more from my lens in terms of experience and how I see that changing in the future. I've tracked a few industries where I think there will be massive growth, and some industries like tourism, logistics, and all that will suffer. But how do you actually repivot very quickly? That's, that would be the few areas that I'll touch upon today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, all of you, for sharing there. And I love actually that straight away you've all gone into talking about some of the positive aspects that this pandemic has actually caused. And I think we can see so much so that the extent of connections induced by globalization are just absolutely astronomical. And where some businesses perhaps have seen a huge surge in business in certain industries, some are really, really struggling. But first and foremost, before we kind of get into some of the trends, let's talk about inclusion and the fact that actually, we are all human beings, and I think we are seeing some really kind of interesting things happening online in this kind of new stay-at-home world when it comes to being more human, being more inclusive, and actually showing that we care. I think those brands that show they care, and organizations that are now stepping up to the forefront that are really demonstrating not only that corporate social responsibility, but the desire to help others for the greater good, as opposed to kind of just, business as usual and business to make profit almost. And I guess any thoughts on that? Any stories that you have all seen with your teams and things that have been perhaps surprising on the positive humanitarian front related to business?
Yeah, look, I might sort of commence early on in, I guess, the COVID experience. Internally, we looked at setting shorter term goals, and one of those goals was, are the things that we're doing, are they helping the greater good, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean coming out with a big statement, but it might just be helping certain clients with a different pricing structure, or spending a bit more time with certain people, or we've created a content series which is really about giving information out to the world with no expectation of return. And we felt that if we could lay something into everything that we do, ultimately us, like everyone, we understand the world gets through this far quicker if we all play our part. And I think that's just been adopted by countless businesses and brands around the world. And the most of the comms that came out and most of the initiatives that came out were laced with genuine willingness to help and wanting to help, because people understand the speed at which we get through it is just dependent on anyone. And if we see a part of the chain that doesn't perform or doesn't work towards that, then it breaks.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I bet it's been fascinating, because at Tribe, as I understand, what you're looking at is a huge amount of what you call micro influencers, which for those who are tuning in, are essentially your everyday people. You know, it is everyone that is making an influence when it comes to, they say, the digital world, on social media and media and such like. Are there significant changes? Obviously, there's a lot happening by way of people putting out genuine positive stuff there, but are there any trends that you've identified when it comes to your usual micro influencer?
Yeah, there's a couple of really interesting things. So first of all, when all the governments came out with their directives and you know, messages around social distancing, all those messages were functional, but not necessarily understandable. And they were also delivered through primetime television and free-to-air television, which a lot of society doesn't actually watch. And so what we saw through a little bit of our own initiatives, but actually just monitoring social trends, creators and influencers were the ones who were talking to their audiences in a language that the audiences understood, and through a platform which was social media that the audiences were paying attention to. So social distancing became stay home, right? A much simpler message. There was huge hashtag usage of stay home, and influencers in their own accord were actually telling people, you have to do this. Ultimately, young people. The other thing that we really noticed, because it's such a dynamic environment and brands are still flocking to social and influencer marketing, is you can start to see the change in the brand messaging that exists. And so normally if you're constructing a TV ad or a print publication, you know, the messaging is quite elongated and thought through and very, very planned. Whereas with influencer marketing and social media marketing, it just happens instantly. And so these creators could take brand messages for brands that were less affected or brands that wanted to push community-based messaging and reflect them to their audiences almost instantly. And so it became quite comfortable for influencers to talk about the brands they were using in isolation. It became quite comfortable for them to be sending messages about certain services which are essential through this time. And that pivot in the brand messaging and the ability for marketers to actually change their tunes very quickly was pretty apparent in our world.
Fascinating. And Shane, obviously you had your own business, you know, number of decades worth of experience within global research and trends. What have been some of the differentials that you've seen, not only I guess before COVID-19 hit, when it comes to media trends and such, but the, you know, the changes that have happened, say, over the last couple of decades and now in the current crisis?
I think we need to be a little bit careful, excuse me, in trying to make a summation as to what's going on right now, because we're living in a very particular period. Let's call it the lockdown period. And we know that what's going on now is not going to last forever, hopefully, thankfully. But what is critical is that during this period, there is an opportunity for companies. You talk about inclusion to help people as well too. Brands are supposedly a means to build a relationship with the product as well too, and it's about having a good relationship with the consumer. But if we start looking at trends, I think it's very difficult to look at this particular point in time for trends. I know for ourselves, where we're an information company, a data company, and that's what a lot of people are looking for right now. You know, what's going to happen? But if we start saying, okay, if we look at behavior that's happening right now, and we know that the lockdown is going to start opening up. We know in Europe that's happening over the next couple of weeks. Has the change in behavior that's occurred now going to continue into the future? And if so, how? We talked there about user experience. I think user experience is very key right now, especially with regards to building a relationship with customers. You look at how they have changed their behavior out of pure necessity. Online, you know, online shopping. We know that, I think they've said in the UK and applies to Ireland too, the grocery industry failed in terms of online shopping. They couldn't keep up with the needs. They couldn't deliver as people wanted. But then, you know, as well too, you have people that are getting into the whole e-commerce world and online or whatever that maybe have not had to before. People that weren't used to online shopping. How do you make the experience easier for them? Maybe more elderly people that weren't used to doing online shopping. Behaviors have to change out of necessity, but it's up to the companies as to how they can make it easier for the consumers during this period. And then once they become more familiar with that change of interaction with the company, their behavior is likely to continue to change into the future. So it's a period of turmoil, I would say, that if you keep very close to it and understand that, what we see today is not going to be the same in 6 months or 12 months, because I think the changes are absolutely huge. It's not going to be just, okay, as of May, as of June, we're going to see a change. It's going to be, within our own company, we're saying it's going to be 2022 before we start to get back to normal, because we know a lot of companies, you're referencing BMW there earlier, the auto industry is wiped out right now. They're just starting to come back to the factories. And we know that those industries, because they'll have lost so much money this year, they won't have the same budgets for next year. And they'll be cutting back, but it's where they deploy those budgets as well too. And I think if we talk about inclusion, there are some industries that are very badly hit, as we know, like the airlines, the leisure industry, hotels and so forth. But everybody's impacted. There was a great article yesterday in the Financial Times about Netflix. Everybody would think their business, it's fantastic. Everybody's streaming, but they can't make movies right now. And they're going to run into problems in having content, because how they survive is having enough content coming online at a rapid pace. And they're basically, all of their movie sets are shut down for a couple of months. So everybody's impacted. Of course, some are impacted more than others. But I go back to my point earlier, if we talk about inclusiveness, COVID is about as inclusive as you can get. It's how do you deal with it and having an open mindset.
Absolutely does. And on the Netflix point, that worries me greatly, because I love The Handmaid's Tale, and I heard that they had delayed that, and I thought, God, really peculiar, because some of the things that you actually see I don't know if anyone's seen The Handmaid's Tale. I know this is a bit of a side discussion, but it is there's a lot of similarities that can be drawn, I hate to say. But anyhow, Fabian, and how are you finding things? Obviously, on the customer experience side, we've heard from Anthony and Shane here about a lot of the big changes, and we're talking quite broadly, I guess, across industries. But online specifically, what is the what is the key to looking at these changes when it comes to customer experience? Because there's a lot of people, the millennials, biggest part of the workforce to date, are very savvy when it comes to online. But as Shane has mentioned there, it is perhaps some of the different generational mixes that are really feeling the pinch, who aren't as savvy as getting on Zoom and getting on to kind of communicate digitally. Do we need to think about this when it comes to customer experience and how we then market to other people?
Customer experience have 6 kind of pivots. I call them the 6 levers, of experience. Experience number 1 would be what I would say co-created experiences. So if you're developing a product or service, sometimes you are developing it with a user, and the kind of affinity that you have with the user is very close. But opposite of that, another kind of experience is what we call dictated experiences. Mm-hmm. So for example, company is so confident with a brand, they push something out to you, we'll be able to hook you in and get you to buy something. So experience number 1, between co-created experiences and dictated experiences, I do feel that in the online, where we are right now in this pandemic, companies that pushes too hard on dictated experiences will fail. Mm. One-sided, it's like, I think I know the best, I'll just blast you with lots of things that you should buy and you should go for. I think that will be a failure. And this discussion that we're having right here is very virtual. We're trying to communicate. We're having all these social distancing. And to be able to communicate, to try to close the gap, which is what I think is the fundamentals of a good co-created experience, would be very key. So that's one trend that I think will go for the mid to long term. The other area would be emotionally charged experiences versus ethical experiences, right? Emotional experiences would be ones that you've seen before, that 20% discount in the morning, it's like going for one free, those kind of experiences is emotionally charged. It's someone advocating it, whether it is right or wrong is emotionally charged, versus something that is more ethical, more socially responsible. And I think the trend is such that this particular ethical experience will become the dominant player, right? So I talked about co-created, I talked about ethical experiences. No one is going to go to the airport unless they know for sure that it is safe, right? No one is going to be booking an air ticket to go to Thailand unless they know that their insurance is covered all the way to the other end. It's not about having a fire sale of cheap deals and such. It's not about that anymore. So the second pillar of ethical experiences would be key. The third pillar is between pure contactless experience, which is experiences that is like done through a robot, or something that is a hybrid between human and computer, or human hybrid experiences. I think the blend of human and hybrid experiences in the future will be key. So just to give you a case in point, if you guys love chocolate, I'm quite sure all of you do, you know that there's a famous brand in the UK called Hotel Chocolat, right? That chocolate brand. They've been doing very well, despite the fact having brick and mortar kind of shop, or shops across the globe. The sensors, that the sensory elements of a shop is such that they can see something, you can touch a chocolate, you can smell the aroma, you can have all that physical, stimulus to you when you go into a shop. But right now, with this lockdown, and the assumption is such that it will go on, for wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, 4. I mean, Shane, you talked about 2022. I think it's going to go on, exactly to that kind of range as well. You just think about the kind of sensory experiences that you can, that you can share with an audience. That is going to dissipate. That is going to be different. So in an online world, the only things that we can play upon is audio. So audio sensory capabilities or experiences will be so much more important. The visual, the quality of that visual is going to be important. How you play around with the mind in terms of understanding behavior, that kind of experiences will be very important. And you need to have a human hybrid kind of experience engine behind you to actually help you understand that a particular user is now thinking about this, enjoying this color, disliking this, this visual. All these kind of things will be the replacement of having a nice physical shop whereby you can go in and enjoy and be stimulated by all your senses. So the three areas that I think, to your question, Lila, it is going to be very different for the millennials, the digital natives, and also for many folks, across the spectrum. I mean, from the young ones all the way to, the older generation. So these three experiences that I've mentioned, the human hybrid experiences, the ethical experiences, and the ability to have more co-created experiences. These three, I think, will be the breadwinners for any company going forward, in the COVID world.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely fascinating, and I concur actually with everything that you've all said there. It is slightly worrying that we are looking at 2022. However, I think the more that we speak about this now, the more that we can put in strategic plans in place, the better we can start to adapt and change. But very briefly to your point there, Fabienne, on the human behaviors, I am a true believer, without sounding too cheesy here, the future of business will be about the heart. I believe that right now it is very, very much about the head. It is about intelligence. Intelligent businesses win, right? But, whilst we can automate a huge amount, what we can't automate, or at least hopefully it will never be able to be automated, is the genuine real life human connection. I mean, Amazon's Alexa can to a degree do it, ask you how you are, but you can't replicate or emulate that real human heart and emotion. And so I do believe that the future of the business world and hopefully wider society will be about leading with the heart and caring ultimately, which I guess translates into brands that care, brands that love, brands that make us feel that warm fuzzy feeling that makes us want to say bye from them.
I agree. I agree. And I would say in the opportunity, I hate to use the word opportunity in the pandemic world right now. What I think um, is that companies that do it right this time, or do it right by their audience or their consumers this time round, will be better remembered, right? That I think is fundamental. When it's the toughest, that emotion and that emotion, that connectivity stays the longest. And this is the chance for companies to do it right. And I'm a big advocate of socially responsible and ethical experiences, and companies that invest in these two areas and do it well this time around, I think will go further in the future.
Absolutely.
One of the I mean, I think also important to remember through this pandemic, or if you sort of think about the recession on the other side, you know, the environment we live in at the moment where everyone is connected, whether it's social media or telephones or text message. So everyone gets to see what everyone else is doing. And if you look back to, let's take pandemic out, but recessions, you know, there's so much now research about prior recessions and how the world responded. And, you know, there's a lot of even research about the brands that did best post-recession were those who kept communicating with their audiences. We have the advantage of research, but now we can all see what everyone else is doing. And so at times it can also feel like a little bit of a clutter, like everyone's rushed into a community message. And, you know, if you look at your social feed or if you look on TV, it's all the same sort of messaging. But ultimately what that allows is for these themes like leading with a heart or safety-based messaging that's going to endure are just going to be more apparent to people and more understandable to people and recognized.
Anthony, what is your view about, I know it doesn't sound right, but I think the digital space is going to be so much more crowded by multiples right now. So just thinking, I've been looking at you know, the amount of digitalization. I know that's an overused word. If you just say, for example, 3 months ago, we only had one e-commerce store, right? Trading in chocolate. I would say 6 months down the road, you know, whether you are leader or follower, there's going to be 100 more. Yep. You know, 12 months down the road, there'll be 500 more. So just imagine your favorite brand of chocolate. It is going to be congested with so many chocolate shops online, right? And everyone is going to be going for heart. They're going to be going for, you know, ways to get that, to get Lila's, purchase, right? To get, you know, some stuff. And I think that crowdedness is something that will happen very, very quickly, you know, in multiples over time. Whether it's social, you know, whether it's influencer marketing and such, I think that that space is going to be so crowded that how you actually or truly differentiate your brand, you know, between the next chocolate shop will need so much more effort and more heart. Yeah, it's not just purely saying that, you know, every buck that I spend, 2% will go to charity. You know, that is going to be, you know, industry standard, right?
Yeah.
And so for you to actually go beyond that and have super returns, companies will really have to go in very, very, you know, deep into the mind, into the heart, into many areas. As I said, how do you co-create, you know, experiences more deeply? How do you actually differentiate your social and ethical strategies from experience viewpoint? How do you get to the heart closer? And next, you know, because it's a digital world, so it's one to many, right? How do you leverage technology? You're not going to be like hiring 1,000 people to do what it is, and that's the digital context, right? It's how you actually leverage the right kind of, you know, human hybrid mix to get to that optimal sort of competitive, you know, capacity. So I think it's just going to be so crowded in the marketplace, you know.
No doubt, and you know what one of the big trends we're seeing at the moment, not just through Tribe, but I'm sure Shane will agree as well, is just this rapid switch to digital. So a lot of budgets that were focused on traditional media are now just being moved over to digital, and of course you've got all these quite traditional businesses or maybe retail-based businesses trying to work out digital very, very quickly. Of course, now entering the specialty zone of pure online and native online businesses like Amazon's or any other small sort of e-commerce proposition on Shopify. And the learning curve will be a lot steeper. And effectively, the beauty of digital is just performance tracking, right? People will know what works, and some people will be faster at working out these new messaging frameworks that are important for the new world. Others will be slower to do it, but have more money that it doesn't matter as much. And ultimately, the free market should work itself out and deliver what is the best experience for the customer, which will start to spend their money with the best shop that they think is delivering to their needs, whether it's economic needs, price-based needs, or emotional-based needs. But that clutter that we're seeing is just that rapid movement, right? And everyone trying to figure it out, and then eventually it will separate, and some will work it out, some won't, which is the beauty of the economy. And I think everyone agrees, like, we've never been through such a concentrated change probably in history, right? Like, even if you think about the World War periods, these happened over years. We're now talking about months. So it's going to be a very interesting transition, and a very rapid transition. Some will win, and some unfortunately won't.
And human habits, I think, takes about 60 days to 70 days to embed itself. So if you are happy watching Netflix, you would, if you watched it consistently for like 6 months, I would just say it will be very hard for you to want to go back to the cinema like every week, right? It's going to be habitual. And I think a lot of research would say about 50 to 60 or 60 to 70 to get that habit, sort of embedded. So I think, looking at the flow of where COVID is going towards, there is the wave 1. I'm very certain that wave 2 is happening in Singapore and China right now. I'm not surprised, my black swan, scenario is that COVID-19, becomes a COVID-20, with a different kind of edge to it. That would be the worst case scenario. But just imagine this is going to continuously go on till a vaccine is available. I gave the analogy of the chocolate shop, right? It becomes online. But in my heart, I think the physical shop will still exist, but I think its physical nature and the digital nature will probably switch places. And for a physical shop to give that confidence, to someone that would bring a child into that shop, or to walk in, into that shop, it will take a lot more information to help inform, that decision, whether one would need to make a trip from home to shop and shop to home. That kind of change will pivot. And I'll give the analogy of a Lego store, right? So if you have kids, how confident, during the 2-year period where COVID is going to be prevalent, and you have like a store with all the bricks in a box, how confident would you say to your child to say, hey, go in and have fun, right? You would need to have a lot of information and data points as the mom or dad to make that decision. So whether it's the number of coughs that your data have picked up in the last 2 hours in the shop, or whether it's the number of sneezes that you have, captured. And it tells you that, oh, literally in the Lego store, there was no cleaning for the last 24 hours. There were 1,265 sneezes and coughs, right? And it gives you that information to tell you, child, please don't go in, right? And I think these kind of changes will need to be redesigned in the future, nevertheless.
Shane, have you got any further thoughts on this before I kind of move us on into perhaps giving leaders some advice about some of these trends that we've been discussing and identifying?
Yeah, I guess just one is, let's call it local businesses, because you've got global businesses like Amazon and so forth. But as Anthony was saying, the learning curve is going to be huge. And how local businesses will deal with that, I think what needs to be taken into account is how people feel about their local businesses. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to see their local restaurant go under. Nobody wants to see their local wine store close or whatever it is. And you're seeing, you've seen already some small local businesses coming up with new approaches, having pre-ordering online, pickup, delivery, just how they're going to make it through this period. And the other thing, sorry, the reason I'm bringing up local businesses is that typically in a crisis, local businesses can move quicker than global businesses and be a little bit closer to the consumer as well too. And about building a brand, you know, whether it's your local store or your chocolate brand or whatever, it's the relationship that you build with the people during this period that will be long lasting. But, you know, if we think about the people, we're talking about inclusiveness here, that are probably worst hit, it's the small businesses, it's the service businesses. And I think if we're talking about an empathy, which I understand is part of what you want to talk about, Leila, and all of this, I think there is a lot of empathy out there from communities towards their local communities, and small local businesses are part of that. And I think there'll be maybe a little bit more open-mindedness to seeing if people can divert their money to the small local girl or guy or whatever than just giving everything to Amazon. But if there are businesses like Anthony's or whatever that can help small businesses and ours, you know, not just big businesses, you know, come to terms with all the changes in behavior and how people watch digital. And digital is meant to be one of the approaches that helps small businesses, not just big businesses. You know, small businesses can't advertise on TV channels, but maybe they can use influencers, and maybe they can use social media more or whatever. I think this is where it'll be a very interesting period to see who comes out, that it's not just going to be Amazon that'll win the day or whatever. It leaves a lot of opportunity for creativity, and necessity drives, you know, invention, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Shane, there's a very interesting operating model or digital platform that came out from China a year plus ago. They got listed in the US. I think it's called the Little Red Book. I'm not quite sure you're familiar with that. Literally, it's about individual crowdsourcing. So for example, if you wanted a shampoo and Anthony wanted the same shampoo and I wanted the same shampoo, I wouldn't be going to Amazon to buy one shampoo each. Basically, the platform allows us to create that demand. So instead of buying just one each, we're telling, an Amazon or to a big, brand to say that for my particular village, I'm going to order 50,000 bottles because it's crowdsourced, right? In terms of the demand. And then instead of paying, X amount of money, you pay it, with 30% discount, right? So to your analogy, how do you save, local businesses? I think, taking a page off, the Little Red Book, operating model, it could go into that kind of direction whereby it is, a little, red and blue book where little, small little businesses that have demand for certain inventories, they are actually crowdsourcing it, through a demand and supply kind of platform. So instead of companies paying, very high prices for, 50, items, now, companies are buying it together as a crowd at a lower price. And at the same time, to be able to take it at a lower price means that they can make a better margin if they adopt a logistics platform that allows them to do that delivery, capability to the end customer. So I think, maybe it's something along these lines that popped into my mind when you mentioned about local.
Okay. Interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that what we will see is a huge amount of innovation for businesses that are small, that care, and for the micro influencers and all of the consumers who perhaps have a smaller remit than some of these big, large kind of conglomerates. There's the opportunity to really kind of challenge thinking and to really innovate. I was speaking with on another panel with the managing director of Barclays, actually, who advised us, interestingly, before the crisis, that we should be looking at funding and this, that, and the other. And he said, look, these are the times of difficulty where organizations, especially SMEs, are really able to harness innovation and to be able to move incredibly quickly, because how many fantastic household brand businesses were born out of these times of crisis. And so there's definitely, there must be some silver linings to these clouds that we have looming over us at the moment. But just moving on very quickly, because I am conscious that you're all very busy and time pending, I have got a number of questions from our members for you each, but just very, very quickly before I ask you all a question each. I just wondered, have we any very short, sharp, key pieces of advice, guidance for other leaders who are perhaps struggling to come to terms with some of the things that we are experiencing? Because obviously leaders are, they have a twofold challenge at the moment. They're often the mouthpiece to their staff, they're the mouthpiece to the rest of the world, as you guys are. Then there's also the concern and worry that perhaps some leaders are experiencing, trying to almost balance all of these different juggling balls in the air. So I wondered if there was any advice very briefly from you all before we go into our summary and a question for each of you.
I was just going to say, look, I think we're all pretty aware there's no playbook for this, and everyone will have a different experience. Everyone will be impacted differently. As I said at the start, I think one of the missing competitive advantages is just how do you manage a business through this? That need for innovation, that need for quick strategy and pivoting is hard enough when you're all in the same room, but now you're actually all talking to each other through video cameras and trying to keep everyone engaged. And so whilst we as Tribe are obviously focusing on all these opportunities, we also just focus on how is everyone doing, and are we making sure that people feel like they're contributing, people feel like they're productive. We've shortened our focuses to monthly objectives rather than quarterly objectives. We've loosened the expectation of outcomes with customers and more sort of thought about, well, what do we control, right? And really sort of going back to the things that we know we can do well, that don't necessarily end in revenue, but end in a positive outcome. And really understanding like that is an advantage because you're galvanizing a group of people to innovate and be motivated. And if you lose that, then all those opportunities that may be there just won't have the capacity to be seized.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Shane, to you.
I guess just a couple of things. One is normally we're talking about being visionary. Now is not the time for being visionary, quite honestly. I think now is the time for being, I know for ourselves, it's about the next 3 months, because it's about how is your business going to come out of what is a crippling period. Nobody can say anything other than that, because we don't know what's going to happen in 6 or 9 months' time. We can try, and you got to keep very close to things, but it's the next 3 months. And then I would say, with regards to what Anthony said, it's difficult enough when everybody's in the room, but okay, you've got things like Zoom that helps or whatever. I think to help unify the teams, the more that you can have more of a single purpose, and even if that purpose changes over time. So I know, for example, ourselves, at the end of the day, we're talking about business. It's about survival, that you keep the business open. So the single purpose over the past month or so has been, how do we focus on our costs? How do we make sure that our costs are reduced as much as possible? How do you keep your main costs under control? There's programs being supported by governments with regards to payroll. In some countries, they're fantastic. In other countries, they don't exist. But at the end of the day, you need to control your costs. So that's the number one objective right now. And two, I think the key purpose that we're focusing on is that as this lockdown starts to open up, to engage with our clients as much as possible to see how we can help them, because a lot of the information, a lot of the data that they have is out the window, because what people did 6 months ago is not necessarily what people are going to be doing in the coming weeks. So I guess my message would be extreme focus will help unify the teams too.
Thank you, Shane. Finally, Fabian, before we go into a question for each of you very quickly.
Yeah, I agree to what you guys said. I mean, for me, the focus is actually on innovation. My focus is on innovation in particular. So during the COVID weeks, for my team at least, we have started to focus on building, connectivity on digital platforms on 2 areas. One is funneling through innovative ideas, because it's always good, to get on a call with 50 people and everyone's just saying, I've got a great idea. This is what we'll do. We'll cut and we'll grow, everything. But it's hard if you don't have an innovation funnel to actually, bring you through that process so that you see it through. So my teams have started to go into a proper innovation platform play, whereby all our innovative ideas are going through a proper platform, and any idea is actually going through this platform and counter-check globally in terms of whether someone else is doing the same thing or something similar. So you don't duplicate your effort, but you are actually amplifying it. So for example, if I'm solving the problem of a chocolate, shop, if there are 50 other teams out there globally from New York to somewhere else sorting that out, I don't want to be the only person trying to solve that problem. I would be going out virtually trying to get the best solution shared, amongst the folks. So this innovation platform play is something that I'm working through. The other thing that I'm sorting out right now, and we use it daily, it's how we do virtual collaboration. And I use a lot of digital tech, capabilities here, like using Miro boards, connecting into Confluent, into Trello's, into different product and software development, capabilities, so that when I have a good idea coming in, I still can develop a virtual environment to develop it through to a product or service. So in the past, it's always teams coming together physically, trying to do things, having a workshop, a design lab, but I've actually switched everything virtual right now. So literally, I can build a digital product even right now, with the teams all on the call, because I'm running it through a platform that is going to encase a lot of these capabilities that I typically do in a physical digital world, but now it's pure digital. So that's how I'm pivoting, and that's how I would encourage folks to have a different think, to their day to day.
Thank you ever so much. And we've had quite a few questions here from our various members, and we're not going to have time to go through all of them, but and some of them, to be fair, we have already covered. So I think if we could maybe just give a very brief snippet each before we summarize for today. I've amalgamated a few of the questions that have come in from various people. Anthony, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. And I know you have touched on some of this. But a couple of members are saying marketing budgets are being slashed. As you said before, there's a huge hike in social media. What are some of the key trends that we need to take note of now when it comes to social media marketing?
Yeah, look, no doubt budgets are being put under pressure, and they're, I guess, depressed budgets are then moving to social, and they're more impactful in social. The beauty of social is you can learn as you go, right? It doesn't take a lot of investment. Unlike TV, we have to produce an advertisement and you have to buy media in advance, and you need to buy a lot of it. With social, you can just test and learn. And anyone who's, I guess, experienced in it or just sort of playing around with it, that's the beauty of it. Most of the platforms you can control yourself, you can put a credit card down and learn to see what's working with your customers, what isn't working, and change your budgets accordingly. And so, we expect that to be a really valuable proposition for those who aren't aware of it, and spends to continue to move to this, I guess, more efficient and performance-based media.
Fantastic. And ultimately, it's pretty low risk as well, is what you're saying. So anyone can ultimately try it, whether you are a large organization or small. And right now is, in a way, the time to try out ideas, because...
Yeah, look, it's fast and agile, right? As I said before, we saw with our brands, they needed to get messages about people consuming their products in homes within a few days. That was up and running and ready to go. And so that ability to pivot with the times, especially as we're going through such turbulent times, is ultimately an advantage for those who can master it.
Thanks so much. And Shane, I've got a really big question here for you. So again, please feel free just to give us a snippet. 'Cause again, a lot we have covered, but I had a lot of questions which were around Ipsos reporting that across 8 and more of the larger countries, suggesting coronavirus is obviously posing a very high threat. You've said till 2022 in our conversation. What are the key things that people and businesses can do to prepare? I know that's a huge question. So obviously, any hints and tips? We've had to very quickly amalgamate things that people are kind of still sending in actually at this point, but I will open up questions and we'll put everything online so people can get in touch.
Oh, to prepare, I think it's about being open-minded about your business model at the end of the day. Because if you're used to, you just look at the huge changes that happened in the digital world over the past few years, that Google and Facebook cut out the middleman and all of the advertisers went direct, and suddenly they're the biggest media companies in the world. And, those companies will continue to be huge. And you saw yesterday, Netflix, their market cap exceeded that of Exxon Oil. Of course, the oil business is in great shape right now. But I would say it's been open-minded. You're going to have to change what your operating model is, how you interact with your customer. So it's it's not all going to completely change. As we come out of this, I think it's keeping very close to the market and seeing what behaviors change, what don't. Some people will want to go back to the way they've been before as much as they can.
If they can.
If they can, yeah. But I guess it's next 6 months will be make it or break it period, right? How we come out of this. Indeed. And how people, and I say that with optimism as well too. I'm very, just our own industry, not to be giving it a plug or whatever, but companies need information more now than ever. And the decisions that they will be making need to be grounded on information. And whether it's, clients going to Anthony and spending money with, through social media, influencers, how, where Fabian and he's involved with user experience, where that's a hugely growing area as well too. It's looking at those trends and I guess using, keeping as close as possible to those trends for your own business.
Thank you so much, Shane. And finally, Fabian, to you, a couple of quite specific questions about a number of things that you've said in the media around customer experience. So you say that the customer experience is just 3% away from making a brand market leader. How do we choose our 3% wisely?
Yeah, it's in those three areas that I mentioned earlier. Focus on the ethical and socially responsible experiences. This will give you a lot of premium if you invest in it properly. The second thing is, try not to dictate too many experiences in the market right now because things are flowing very rapidly. So if you have touch points with the consumer, focus on co-creating more experiences that would be acceptable to them and enjoyable to them. So this would be the second bit. The third is we'll need a bit of investment, but look at the rebalancing between how much human and how much hybrid components that you need for your experiences. So when I say hybrid, it means that if there is a particular need, for example, to want to understand more about a product, and sometimes you can just have a proper FAQ that's coming out on your website. But sometimes it gets quite convoluted where, if it's this taste of a chocolate or something where you need someone to talk about it, right? So that is the part where companies will need to decipher and say, I want it to be 75% human or 25%. I know I'm making it very simplistic, but looking at where the premium touch points will be, where there's going to be a lot of return on experience investment if you put the right kind of human element to it, or whether it's a blend between a data kind of component and a human kind of component. So you need to look at that in its entirety when you design your future experiences. So three areas: ethical, co-created, and just understand what is the best blend of human and hybrid experiences that would make sense for your business.
Thank you all ever so much. There's been some incredible nuggets of wisdom and hopefully lots of inspirational points there for everyone to be able to take away. I've been prolifically making notes as you've all been speaking, and just by way of summary, some of the things that I've taken away are actually a lot of the positive points, which is fantastic. I think from what you've all said, COVID-19 is going to be seen by many in business as the start of potentially successful global pandemics. So on the one side, it certainly demonstrated the extent of connections induced by globalization, which is fantastic. And I certainly believe, from listening to all of you in your highly experienced positions, that an open world can really generate more knowledge when it comes to sharing and innovation. Of course, carefully balanced by health and safety as core considerations, because of course health, mental health, the well-being of all of our workforce resources are absolutely key right now. But perhaps, as you've alluded to with some of the business examples, actually some of the value chains are stretched very, very thin, and we're perhaps relying on certain areas too much for certain vital goods. So perhaps some of the key pieces that have come out of today are how we invent this new global trade model, and not just kind of the juxtaposition of national selfish obsessions, but perhaps some of the really kind of collaborative opportunities that are out there post COVID, and start to think really more about, you know, business with the heart, ethical business, really trying to carve out niches for ourselves by actually doing really, really good. And I'm sure together, as long as we are sticking together as businesses and human beings, we can start to reinvent, rebuild, innovate a safe but more open world. So thank you all ever so much. You've just been fantastic, and I'm going to say thank you on behalf of our members and those as well who have put in questions. If we haven't answered them, I'm very, very sorry, but obviously, you know, we are putting on a lot more content now to support you all when it comes to coronavirus and the uncertain times, so do feel free to reach out. The guys on the panel are ridiculously busy. It's taken me a long time because actually it's very hard to track down senior people, especially at this time. So if you are reaching out directly, then please just do bear in mind that everyone is very, very busy, but you can connect with us on our platform. You can share. We've got plenty of other thought leadership coming up to make sure that we can help support you all. So thank you all ever so much again.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. My name's Layla McKenzie, and you have been listening to the Dial Global Virtual Lounge. We're actually with you every week. You can check us out on the COVID-19 Support Hub. We're giving you completely free, all-access digital during these times. Visit www.dialglobal.org, and we'll put all of the show notes and links to the guys and their businesses and some of the key points that they gave in terms of advice. If you didn't write it down, don't worry. See you again very soon.